My own kids sent us to an old age home, saying, "You're a burden to us now." The morning they came with their decision was bathed in a pale, filtered sunlight, the kind that slips reluctantly through curtains, as if hesitant to witness what must unfold. The room we'd lived in for 3 decades bore the smell of old books, talcum powder, and worn leather, and their voices cut through it with surgical indifference. Michael, the eldest, stood stiffly with a tablet in hand, its cold screen glowing with bullet points and budget comparisons. Samantha didn't look up from her phone, her thumb dancing across the screen like this was any other errand, like taking your parents and putting them out of sight was as ordinary as returning a library book. And Daniel, our sweet, timid Daniel, he at least had the decency to look ashamed, though he said nothing. Perhaps guilt had rooted his tongue, but silence is a complicity all its own. "We've thought about this long and hard," Michael began, voice devoid of warmth, of hesitation. He always did pride himself on efficiency, even in cruelty. "You'll have everything you need: medical care, fresh meals, community. It's time." That last phrase fell like a gavel, not an invitation, a verdict. We said nothing. We didn't ask for reconsideration. We didn't protest or plead or point to the countless late nights spent stitching torn dreams and broken confidence. We didn't mention the time we worked 3 jobs between us just to buy Samantha her violin, or the nights we went without dinner so the children wouldn't feel the scarcity. What use would memory be against a wall so well constructed with rationality and financial planning? Instead, we nodded, not out of agreement, but out of a final weary understanding. This was not our home anymore. Not the house, not the family. A new generation had taken root, one that no longer recognized the soil it grew from. The ride to the facility was long, but not uncomfortable. The air in the car was a strange mix of air freshener and quiet judgment. We watched the world pass through tinted windows, coffee shops we used to visit when dates still felt novel, the park where Daniel once skinned his knee, and how he cried until we bought him an orange popsicle. We didn't point any of this out. They wouldn't care. To them, these were just streets. Ordinary, forgettable intersections of asphalt and brick. The facility was called Silver Pines, though the pines were few, and the silver came only in our hair. It was a sprawling structure, functional but uninspired, designed by someone more concerned with occupancy rates than dignity. A nurse greeted us with forced cheer, her uniform too crisp, her smile too precise. The paperwork was already filled out, signatures already made. We were cargo in a transition already complete. Michael handed over a manila folder, exchanged polite words with the administrator, and said, "We'll visit soon." We knew what that meant. They left quickly. No lingering hugs, no backward glances. Just a car pulling away with 3 less than strangers inside, leaving behind 2 hearts, carefully discarded. That night in our new shared room, 2 twin beds, a dresser, a single window facing a gray courtyard, we unpacked what little they allowed us to bring. A framed wedding photo, my knitting needles, his crossword puzzle book, tokens of a life too vast to fit into 3 cardboard boxes. We sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, not speaking, not crying. There was a dignity in silence that still belonged to us, and we held on to it like one last thread of autonomy. Outside, a shuffle of wheelchairs and the soft murmuring of lives already forgotten moved past our door. The hall was alive with resignation. But in the quiet, we found something unexpected. Not bitterness, not fury, just a hollow kind of peace. Like the hush after a storm has torn down the last tree, there was nothing left to protect. The fortress of parenthood had been breached from within, and with it, our illusions. Yet we did not feel broken, hollowed perhaps, but not shattered, because we had done what we came to do. We had raised them. We had loved them. We had built something solid, even if it no longer belonged to us. The days that followed moved in rhythm. Mornings filled with prescribed medications and scheduled meals. Afternoons where the television played game shows too loud in the common area. Nights where sleep came slowly, then all at once. We learned names. Mrs. Kapoor in the next room, who used to be a concert pianist. Gerald down the hall, whose hands never stopped trembling but whose stories never lost their sharpness. We formed our quiet society of the forgotten, exiled royalty in a crumbling court, swapping tales of love and sacrifice like treasured contraband. Sometimes we sat by the window and watched the parking lot, not out of hope, but out of habit. On rare occasions they came. Our children, or at least the facsimiles they had become. They came with forms to be signed, questions about pensions and power of attorney. Samantha once asked us to co-sign a loan, her eyes darting behind designer sunglasses, voice flatter than the paper she held out. Michael came to update our living wills. Daniel, bless him, only brought himself, never quite looking us in the eye. We signed. We always signed, not because we owed them, but because some part of us still remembered their smaller selves, the ones who used to curl up in our laps, terrified of thunderstorms, and beg us to make the world safe again. If nothing else, we could give them this last shield. Yet, as time unfurled its slow, inevitable ribbon, we began to see something in their faces. An echo. A flicker. A question forming at the corners of their carefully constructed lives. They saw the way we smiled, despite the betrayal. The way we still folded each other's laundry, still held hands during the Sunday hymns in the common room. They saw what love looked like when it wasn't convenient. One day, they too will slow down. Their steps will falter. Their hands will search for something to hold on to and find only empty air. And perhaps then they will remember. Not out of guilt, not out of obligation, but out of something deeper, something primal and true. The way our hands held theirs in the night, the way we were never the weight, they were the reason we kept carrying it all. And maybe, just maybe, they'll wonder why no one's reaching back. The walls of Silver Pines carried sound in strange ways. Laughter always seemed too distant, like it had passed through a dozen rooms before reaching yours. Pain, on the other hand, echoed. You could hear it in the shuffling of slippers down the hallway, in the plastic wheels of walkers grinding softly against the linoleum, in the involuntary sighs that filled the dining room when the food was once again tasteless and lukewarm. There was no mourning here, only waiting, drawn out like a violin string too tightly wound, vibrating with a note no one could hear, but everyone felt. We had become part of this symphony of stillness. Each morning followed a pattern now so tightly wound it might as well have been programmed. A nurse with kind eyes but a dead voice came in at 7 to check our vitals. Breakfast at 8, oatmeal with not enough salt, scrambled eggs that tasted more like sponge than substance, and orange juice so diluted it felt like drinking ghosts of fruit. At 9, there were activities, yoga for the ones whose bones hadn't turned traitorous, bingo for those who remembered numbers better than faces, and the occasional visitor from a local church, dispensing sermons with the hollow rhythm of someone trying to fill silence rather than souls. But somewhere between the second and third week, something subtle shifted. It began with a knock, a quiet one, almost hesitant. When I opened the door, there stood Gerald, not with his usual tremor-addled cane and muttered greetings, but with a tray. On it, 2 cups of tea, real tea, not the hospital-brewed sludge they served at 5 like a joke, and a plate of biscuits that looked like they hadn't been mass-produced in some sterile kitchen. He didn't say anything at first, just held the tray out like an offering, a peace treaty between strangers navigating the same purgatory. "They're from my daughter," he said finally, voice creaky but not broken. "She sent too many. Figured I'd share them before the mice get the better of me." We invited him in. It was the first time our room held more than our own unspoken thoughts. He told us about his life before Silver Pines, about being a postmaster in a town so small it didn't show up on maps, about his wife who had died 2 winters ago, quietly, as though she'd only gone to sleep and forgot to wake. He told us about his daughter, the one who sent the biscuits, who called every Sunday but never visited, who claimed flights were too expensive and work was too demanding. We didn't have to say much. Our silence was an understanding in itself, a shared fluency in abandonment. From then on, our room became a sort of meeting ground, not for parties or noise, but for a quiet refuge. Mrs. Kapoor came next, wrapped in a shawl that still smelled faintly of sandalwood and the life she once lived in Mumbai. She didn't speak much, but she hummed under her breath, a melody foreign and haunting, like wind winding through old temples. Then came Walter, who had once been a jazz drummer in Chicago before arthritis silenced his rhythm. He still tapped out beats on the armrest of his chair, fingers dancing ghost notes only he could hear. We didn't say it aloud, but we all knew what we were building. Not a rebellion, not exactly, but a reclamation, a collective refusal to be reduced to names on clipboards and wristbands scanned for medication. We told stories, some true, some half-remembered, some deliberately exaggerated. We shared what little we had, books with cracked spines, wool socks, a jar of hard candy someone's niece had sent 3 Christmases ago. It wasn't joy, not quite, but it was something sturdier than survival. Then came the letter. Not from our children. No, they were still firmly committed to their quarterly visits, as predictable as tax season. This letter arrived through the facility's mail system, folded into an envelope that bore no return address. Inside was a photo, grainy and yellowed at the edges, of a younger version of us. Taken in a carnival, probably during the summer of '82. I had cotton candy stuck in my hair. He was laughing, caught mid-motion, eyes squinting in the sun. Behind us, blurry but unmistakable, stood our children, young and smiling, hands sticky with sugar and innocence. Written on the back, in a slanted, almost desperate scrawl, were 4 words. Do you remember this? There was no signature, no explanation. But that night I stared at the photo long after the lights went out, long after his breath fell into the slow rhythm of sleep beside me. My hand traced the curve of Samantha's pigtails, the gap in Michael's front teeth, Daniel's mismatched shoes, and I thought, yes, I remember every minute, every scraped knee, every sleepless night, every fever cooled by wet cloth and whispered lullaby. I remembered all of it. What I couldn't quite grasp anymore was where that version of them had gone. Days bled into weeks. Our group of residents, unofficially dubbed the Quiet Insurgents by Walter, continued to gather, share, exist. We began writing. Little notes, left under each other's pillows. Not poetry, not quite, but fragments of feeling. Mrs. Kapoor once left me a sentence that simply read, "Memory is a garden. Some flowers you water, others die alone." Gerald wrote, "My daughter dreams in color. I dream in grayscale now." They were small gestures, but they filled the spaces the nurses' routines couldn't touch. Then, on a Tuesday cloaked in drizzle, Samantha returned. No warning, no call. She just appeared in the lobby like a ghost unbound from its haunts, dressed too well, smelling faintly of rose and stress. She walked past the front desk with the briskness of someone who didn't want to be questioned. And when she reached our room, she hesitated, not with her body, but in her eyes. That split-second falter before she knocked. She wasn't alone. Daniel was behind her, hands buried in his jacket pockets, eyes downcast. He looked thinner than before, or maybe more tired. He didn't speak, but he offered a nod, small and uncertain. Samantha cleared her throat. "We found a photo," she began, voice brittle, "from a long time ago. We didn't remember where it came from. Michael found it while cleaning the attic." She didn't say it, but I could hear it all the same. And for a moment, we remembered you. The silence between us was thick, not with tension, but with the weight of things unsaid. No apologies, no redemption arcs. Just that. An echo of memory, uncertain, but persistent. Perhaps that is how healing begins. Not with forgiveness, not with dramatic declarations, but with one remembered photograph, and a knock at the door that no one was expecting. The seasons changed without ceremony at Silver Pines. There were no children to bring home glittering autumn crafts, no laughter spilling from schoolyards to mark the arrival of winter, no clamor of family dinners or festive chaos. Instead, time passed in subtle hues, nurses trading short sleeves for sweaters, the hum of the heating unit replacing the drone of the fan, the occasional wreath hung on the rec room door by a staff member with a sense of duty rather than celebration. It was during one of these changing days, midway through a gentle snowfall, when the world outside had turned soft and white, that the letter came. Not a forgotten bill or advertisement for mobility scooters, but a real letter. Handwritten, ink slightly smudged where the pen had hesitated. The envelope bore Samantha's handwriting. I recognized it immediately, that looping cursive she had once labored over at the kitchen table, frustrated that her R's looked too much like N's. Inside, the message was brief. No poetry, no grand gestures. Just words, scrawled across lined paper, like someone digging through emotional debris and unsure what to hold on to. We were wrong. 3 words. Nothing more. There was no flourish of guilt, no declarations of remorse dressed in false sentiment. But those 3 words echoed louder than anything they'd said since the day they drove us away. They carried weight, raw, clumsy, and real. I held the letter between my fingers like a fragile relic, reading it again and again, as if repetition would change its shape. But it didn't need to. Its simplicity was its truth. They came again not long after. This time, not with briefcases and agendas, but with coffee from the same shop we used to take them to on Sunday mornings, and a tin of butter cookies that we both knew were mostly there for nostalgia, not flavor. Michael was there, surprisingly quiet. His confidence, once bordering on arrogance, had dulled, tempered into something almost apologetic. Daniel, still unsure of his place, sat beside us and reached out without being asked. He held my hand, tentative at first, then firm. He didn't speak until the others had gone silent. "I didn't fight them," he said quietly. "I should have. I thought I was just being practical, but I think I was scared of what it meant to watch you both grow old." No one interrupted him. No one corrected or comforted. We simply listened, and that, in itself, was a kind of forgiveness. Not spoken, not formalized, just present. In the weeks that followed, the visits became regular. Not out of obligation or need for signatures, not because something was expected. They brought photo albums we hadn't seen in decades, some dust-covered, others still in those cheap plastic sleeves from drugstore prints. They sat with us through bingo games and evening documentaries about things none of us really understood. They asked questions, real ones, about our childhoods, about each other, about what it had been like to fall in love without smartphones, without swiping left or right, without second-guessing every heartbeat. And for the first time in a long time, we allowed ourselves to answer. They didn't try to take us back. That conversation didn't even come up. Perhaps they understood that what was broken could not be reversed to its former shape, but it could be made into something new. Silver Pines was still where we slept, but it no longer felt like a prison. It had become a ground of memory, a garden of ghosts and stories and cautious laughter. And now, a place of tentative mending. Our group, the quiet insurgents, remained. Gerald passed away one chilly night quietly in his sleep. His daughter arrived 2 days late to collect the few items he had left behind. But in his drawer, folded carefully between crossword puzzles and chocolate wrappers, was a note in our handwriting. It read, "You mattered. You were not forgotten. We had all signed it." Mrs. Kapoor's humming grew louder over time, her voice stronger, her eyes sharper with each passing week. Walter finally tapped out a full rhythm one afternoon and grinned for the first time since arriving. We weren't healed, but we weren't numb anymore. Then, one evening, Samantha arrived with something unexpected: paperwork. She placed it on the table, along with a key. "We sold the old house," she said. "It was too big for anyone now. But we bought something smaller, closer. A little cottage near the lake. It has a room for both of you. Not out of guilt. Not because we want to fix everything. But because we'd like to try again. If you'll let us." We didn't answer right away. We took a walk that night around the facility grounds. Snow blanketed everything, muting the world to a hush. Every tree branch was wrapped in frost. Every breath visible in the air like a whisper made manifest. And as we walked slowly, our arms entwined, we talked. Not about moving, but about life. About how strange it was to raise people who forget, and yet stranger still to love them anyway. About how love, real love, often survives in spite of memory, not because of it. We returned inside. We didn't pack. Not yet. Instead, we went to sleep in those narrow twin beds, one final time, the photo of our family still on the dresser, yellowing at the edges, but whole. Weeks passed. Then spring. The air smelled of damp earth and rebirth. We made the choice, not because we were owed it, not because they had earned it, but because hope, like all seeds, needs space to grow. We moved into the cottage. It wasn't large, but it was filled with laughter and shared meals and the quiet warmth of effort being made. Samantha came every weekend, her violin now resting in the corner of our sunroom, finally played again. Daniel built a garden with us. Michael, always the most distant, now found comfort in simply sitting nearby, reading, present without having to perform. There were no grand gestures, no emotional climaxes, just steady, slow-building care. We still had aches. We still moved slower than we once did. But when our hands shook, they were held. When we forgot things, they reminded us. not with frustration, but patience. We were not burdens. We were not forgotten. We had not been erased, only paused for a time. And now, in the gentle rhythm of returned love, we began again, not as the foundation, not as the forgotten, but as family.